Hey, Magic Makers. I hope you are having a great day. Today, I'm going to do something a little interesting. A few weeks ago, I had the opportunity to listen to a podcast called The Huberman Lab, and he interviewed a woman by the name of Dr. Stacy Sims. And it was a really great podcast. And, basically, he sat down and they broke down what training and nutrition looks like for women in midlife, women in their 40s. And it was a really good podcast. It's about a 2 hour podcast. And if you're not familiar with the Huberman Lab podcast, the person who podcasts this, his name is Dr. Andrew Huberman, and he's a neuroscience professor at Stanford Medical School. And he's really about longevity, healthy aging, those sort of things. And I'm going to link the actual podcast episode in the show notes, but I will also link some information about him. He has a bunch of different, thoughts on human longevity, healthy aging, and that sort of thing. And he interviewed Dr. Stacy Sims. And Dr. Stacy Sims, she is one of the foremost female experts on female physiology. She really kind of broke out. I can't remember exactly when she did this TED Talk. And again, I'll link that TED Talk in the show notes about why we need more women in medical research. And, most of the medical research until recently has been on small men, saying they're very similar to females, and how we just have so many different things going on in our bodies that we aren't small men. And the research that you do on small men don't really have a significant impact on how we as women would be impacted by said research. So she is all about how do you optimize training and nutrition for women. She works primarily with athletes, but you're able to take some of that information away from it, because many of the women who I work with, many women who are listening to the show, we have been active for most of our life, or we want to be active. And this podcast was just a lot of the things that I've been incorporating into my own personal training, but a lot of the things that I have been working with my clients on, as to how do we focus on being the healthiest women in the nursing home, or keeping our assets out of the nursing home and be able to bounce back through life. And so, I love this podcast, because this podcast breaks down how to work out and eat over 40. And so many of us grew up with that go big or go home mentality. And in this podcast, she breaks down the science, the biology of why those workouts are no longer serving us, or why you're no longer seeing the changes in your physique that you did back in the day when you did these styles of workouts, or when you worked out in this capacity. So they both have a great deep conversation, because Stacey is that exercise physiology person, and Andrew is that brain person. So it's kind of like they give that give and take between brain health and the physical, biology help of the body. So first, let's talk nutrition, right? And so in any number of Facebook groups, or any, cocktail party you go to, and someone over 40, it's like, how do I lose the belly fat? How do I lose the jiggle over 40? And the number one answer I always see is intermittent fasting. Now, I'm going to do a deeper podcast on intermittent fasting, but and I'll explain, go a little deeper into this. But for this podcast, I am not a fan of intermittent fasting as the first place to start. If you're struggling with how to eat healthy, intermittent fasting just adds a layer of complication to it. And so I do believe there's a time and a place for intermittent fasting, but I also believe that let's stop making dieting harder than it needs to be, especially if you're trying to get healthy habits underneath your belt. Stacy, breaks it down into two ways that I really like the thought process here. There's intermittent fasting and time restricted eating. All right. So intermittent fasting is that you fast for a specific period of time, right? So you fast for 16 hours. I mean, you do not eat for 16 hours, and then you eat in an 8-hour window. And there's several different types of fasting you could possibly do. And like I said, I'll go into a deeper podcast. This is not the podcast to do it. This is just, I'm giving you that 35,000 foot level so you can see what I'm talking about. And then you have time restricted eating. So that means you're eating more in line with how you are living in your life. So you're eating when you wake up, you're stopping food, in a few hours before you go to bed, primarily for digestion, right? So it's recommended that we stop eating about 2 to 3 hours before we go to bed, just so that our body has an opportunity to digest the food before we lay down. And we don't have any type of digestive issues like acid reflux or anything like that. So, Dr. Sims, she's not a fan of intermittent fasting, except for in cases of PCOS or insulin resistance. So it's not this blanket, like everyone should intermittent fast. And also, if you're someone who is in menopause and there is a big doctor out there who talks about intermittent fasting for menopausal weight loss, it's not even recommended by the Menopause Society as a way for a way to fight menopausal weight gain. And so why Dr. Stacy doesn't like intermittent fasting is that she says our bodies are already metabolic superstars. And the primary driver for intermittent fasting is that it's supposed to give your metabolism a nice boost in the arm. But since women are already metabolic superstars, we're already built to go for distance. Like that's what our bodies are truly built for. And so we have these fibers. They're called oxidative fibers. Fancy talk, right? So here's how we break down that fancy talk. Imagine if your muscles were a bunch of little tiny machines, right? And some machines are good for running for a long time without getting tired. And then they use a special fuel to keep going. And these machines are called high oxidative fiber. So like they're the Energizer bunny, right? They keep going and going and going. So these fibers are really good at letting our bodies drive really far on a little bit of gas. They only use a little bit of oxygen to get their energy, and they don't get tired really quickly. So they help us like working out, running, or playing for a long time without getting too worn out. So these are the kind of fibers that intermittent fasting works best on. But since we already, as a woman, have those already predisposed on board, we don't need to jumpstart them because they've already jumpstarted because we already have a built-in high number of these high oxidative fibers. So that's why she's not a big fan of intermittent fasting for women as a blanket. And again, another podcast, I'll go so deep into it, you'll be like, Kim, shut up. I can't hear anymore about intermittent fasting. So that's intermittent fasting. The second part she talks about is that why she's not a fan of intermittent fasting, because ladies, especially over 40, for years, and this is old bodybuilding talk. It was like a pride, you wanted to do fasted workouts because fasted workouts tapped into your fat stores. That was the thought, right? That was the thought. And over the years, there's been like 50-50 studies, right? Some studies like, yeah, it's good for you. Some studies like, yeah, it doesn't really do much. So, it's up to you if you want to eat or you're not eat. I, for years, was of the school that I did not eat before I worked out. I didn't. I would have some BCAAs, some creatine, and some coffee, and I would go on to my workout. Now, after hearing her conversation, and I've changed a few things in my nutrition as well. I've started to be hungry when I work out in the morning. So I have been eating before I work out, not sitting down and have like a big, big boy special breakfast. I've been doing some applesauce with some protein powder mixed in. And doesn't like sit in my stomach like a rock. But I feel like my workouts, I've been able to feel a little bit, bigger lifts, stronger lifts, because I have some fuel on board, or I don't get hungry halfway through my workout. And sometimes I have to kind of bail on the workout because I'm too hungry to finish the workout. And so for years, we've been told it taps into our fat stores. But guess what? Fasted workouts, especially as we're midlife, can crank up the stress. And instead of tapping into our body stores, it's tapping into our muscle stores. And that's not what we want, right? We want it to we're looking for it to tap into our body fat. And we've worked hard for muscle. So we don't want this fasted workout to start taking fuel from our muscles. So Dr. Sims recommends what I said, having a little something before you eat, a small stack, a little protein, um, you know, and it's like a little protein. So it's like, 15 grams of protein. And it's like maybe a half a scoop of protein powder, bites, 2 bites of a Greek yogurt, whatever is going to work best for you. If you're someone who likes coffee, so maybe you can have, coffee and whip in some collagen powder into it or some other protein powder into it. Totally your call to help maximize your benefits when you work out. And, you know, which leads into protein. I know so many of you are like, I've heard too much about protein. And so one of the biggest things that I've taken away is that, you know, on the low end, 30 grams of protein, but especially ladies over 40, you can bump it up to at least 60 grams of protein. And this isn't about muscle. It's about living a strong, unassisted life. It's like making sure we keep as much muscle on board as possible. And once you hit about 35, you're losing anywhere from 3 to 5% of your muscle every single decade. So that's why when you hit into your 40s and 50s, some of you look and you're like wiggling your arms and you see jelly on your legs. It's like, I want you to ask yourself, how much protein are you taking on board? Because what you're seeing is under muscled. You're not seeing fat. It's just what untoned muscle looks like. And so how do we get the protein on board to help stabilize that loss, but also get that strength training on board so that we can not, minimize that jiggle that many of us kind of seems like it comes overnight. The other thing I really like about, I'm in alignment with Dr. Stacy on here is that, she is an 80-20. She talks about, life would suck without whiskey and chocolate. And I'm same here, 80-20. I'm never going to be that coach that's going to tell you that like you have to white knuckle your way through. Like 20% of your life should be fun. I want you to be that mom who has an ice cream cone with their kid on a summer day. If you go on vacation, I live here in New England. If you go on vacation and you want to have that lobster roll, rock on with your bad self and have the damn fries. But 80% of your life, you have to think about your choices, and so that's where she lives, big believer of all vegetables, all fruits, none of this like you should never have a mango, it's like everything fits again in moderation, right? Are you living on the mango diet or are you throwing in also a big fan of fiber, right? We want to make sure that we're having as much fiber as possible. One, it's filling, right? It's satiating. Second, it helps us with pooping. And the more we're able to poop, or the more we're able to just help another facet of getting rid of toxins in our body. Now, I know many people will be like, my doctor told me it's okay that I poop 3 days a week, or or once every 3 days. I'm about optimal, right? And I want you to ask yourself, look at your fiber. Are you getting anywhere at least 20 grams of fiber in your nutrition? And I'm not talking popping a gummy. I'm literally saying, look at your nutrition. And if you track one thing this week, track your fiber. How many grams of fiber are you actually getting? And not from a pill or a capsule or a gummy. And that's going to be really telling. Same with your protein, right? How much protein are you really getting? And, the one big challenge I have here is that if you are doing like a plant-based nutrition, unless you really have some type of like, how do I say this? Like aversion to animal. If you're eating plant-based because you think it's the best way to eat, really ask yourself the question. And am I using a lot of beans to get protein? Because if I am using a lot of beans, I'm also getting a lot of carb. So I want, as you go into the plant-based, and I'm going to do a whole podcast on plant-based, it's really requires you to be very mindful of your nutrition. The other thing about plant-based is that you really have to, like, you can't wing it. Like, there's no way, I had a client who first came to me and she wanted to go plant-based. And I told her, I was like, brutal honesty, you can't wing it. right? You can wing a lot of it. I could be out in the wild and easily find a lot of foods that I could eat like at a convenience store. Plenty of convenience stores now are selling hard-boiled eggs or beef jerky or some other jerky, right? That I can easily grab and go. But for plant-based folks, it ain't easy. It ain't easy out there in the wild that you really, really have to plan. Um, and then we talk about low energy availability. And so low energy availability is like, have you ever felt wired yet tired? And that's your body crying for fuel. And basically, low energy availability is when you don't have enough energy to support what you're doing. And I see it all the time in women. For years we were told only eat a certain number of calories, like only 1,200 calories, or never eat this or never eat that. And so like our calorie is like really low, but then I'm going to the gym for 2 hours at a clip. And I'm like wondering, why are my cravings off the charts? Why am I always hungry? It's because I'm not pulling in enough calories to support my acts of daily living or my exercise. And so my body is starting to slowly click off certain body body systems. So, and I see this a lot with my A plus plus, with the side of A plus plus clients when we first start working together. You know, they told themselves they're going to work out at 5 a.m. And so even if they didn't get a good night's sleep, they got 4 hours of sleep, they're still going to hit that 5 a.m. workout because they promised themselves. And like, I'm all about honoring promises to yourself, but I'm also about how do you listen to your body and do what your body is actually needing in the moment versus like beating it into submission. And that's where most of us spent a bulk of our life. We beat our bodies into submission. And so I want you to ask yourself, like, give yourself permission to rest, right? There's a time and a place for the pushing, and then there's a time and a place for you to say, you know what? Sometimes you just gotta like sit your ass on the bench and chill. Think about it like this, right? If you had a piggy bank and that's where you keep all of your energy, if you will. And if I spend more money than what I have in the piggy bank, I'm exhausted. And that's where we really have to start thinking about how do we just spend our energy. And it's important to balance out our energy so that we can find this healthy balance between our inputs, aka calories, and our outputs, aka energy and acts of daily living. And so here's where this part here it gets a little interesting, so that Stacy talks about recovery and adaptation, and it's important to give ourselves the time, right? Give ourselves at least 2 to 3 days of a walk or a gentle stretching, because recovery is crucial to the workout itself, right? That's where our body like regenerate during the rest and recovery. And so it's like feeling off, it's like have a listen to yourself, give yourself, if you told yourself you're going to work out and you're just not feeling it, give yourself, 10, 15 minutes of just warming up, right? I'm going to warm up and see how I feel. And if you don't still not feeling it when you warm up, then stick with a walk, right? Like, no one's going to be like, oh, Kim, you said you were going to go hard on Monday and here it is Monday and you didn't do shit, right? The only person who's saying that is your ego. And my ego she is a straight up gangster. And that was a real hard pill for me to swallow when I first started kind of like starting to back myself out of these like, kill myself workouts. And so the best way to describe a workout, and I did a whole podcast on this, is that red, green, yellow, right? Just like a traffic light. If I didn't get a good night's sleep last night, I feel sick, I feel like trash, that's a red for me. That's like, hey, today's not the day to go balls to the wall. Today's a day that I might just have a pure straight up rest day. I might just go for a nice long walk, or I might just foam roll, call it a day and not do anything. Yellow is like, hey, I feel okay, but I'm not feeling like optimal. So maybe I lift, but it's not going to be like, I'm not going to be setting a PR today. And then finally, green, right? I feel like I got a great night's sleep. I feel fueled. I feel hydrated. I feel like amazing. And I'm going to like just go balls to the wall. And if you're starting to transition into these new style workouts, I keep an old school like piece of paper training log. You can also put it in your phone, whatever. And I just track like reds, yellows, and greens, just so I can see what's going on in my life. And then I can kind of like map it back, right? I wear an Aura ring and I can map it back to be like, okay, I didn't get a good night's sleep. So of course that workout was trash. Or, oh, I didn't really eat a lot that day. So of course that was that. Or, or it's like, hey, I hit on all cylinders and this is why I got a 7.5 hours night of sleep. I felt freaking amazing. And it's gonna be like a good like lift day. And so I want you to start thinking in terms of that versus like, it's Monday and this is how it has to be. It's Tuesday, this is how it has to be. It's Wednesday, blah, 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 blah. Whatever your thing that we start telling ourselves, it's like, let's start to be a little bit more honoring what our body is telling us versus like the calendar tells me this is today and this is what I have to do. So she talks about that when we strength train, and she goes through the different breaks down different age groups. So if you are someone who has, daughters or young women in your life in the 20s and 30s, this is the perfect time for them, if they haven't already, to really start to lift, to really learn the movements, right? And primarily compound movements. So that means we're doing, which is multi-joint movement. So we're doing a deadlift that works through multiple joints versus, just doing bicep curls or doing tricep extensions, right? We're working full multi-joints, compound movements. We're doing periodization so that we're doing, every, 4 to 8 weeks, we're changing the workout, we're changing the rep count, we're changing the exercise, but still working in compound movements. And we're starting to add in interval training, pure interval training that you're working for 40 seconds, recovering for 20 seconds, you're working for a minute, recovering for 90, that type of interval training. Because in our 20 and 30, that's where we're building that muscle. And so when we hit that backside in our 40s, now the shift becomes, we're now going to add in some power-based exercise. So that is more like explosive exercises. That's jump squats, that's kettlebell swings, that's snatches, just really working to keep those fast twitch muscles going. When we get those fast twitch muscles going, that's going to help us with our balance. It's going to help us with our stability so that as we get on in age, we have the ability to live on our own, be able to walk on our own without needing assistance. You're still resistance training, but instead of, a strict periodization, we're really working on strength and seeing how many reps in reserve we can keep. And that reps in reserve is that if the program calls for 6 to 10 reps, right? You're asking yourself, if I were to do, say, that 6 rep, would there be 2 more good reps that I have left? And that's the weight I'm going to change. If I was doing 10 reps, could I do 12 reps? Could I do 12 reps? And that's where we're going to change. And so, the other thing is like, so we talk about power, you also could be incorporated by like jump training, like I said, those explosive moves, about 10 minutes, 3 times a week, right? So it's really more about bone density. And so by the time, most of us get in our 40s, we start to lose bone density because our estrogen is getting a bit wonky. And so we want to keep up that bone density as much as possible. And, once you hit menopause, believe it or not, you can lose up to 1/3 of your bone density if you are not already strength training heavy or incorporating some form of jump training into your life. And then she really hits on what HIT looks like for us. And so for most of us, HIT for us is that we go and we do something for 40 minutes that's freaking hard. Like, so 40 minutes is a hard workout, but we have no real, like the intensity is up there for the entire time. And so what she really looks at is, how do you go as hard as you can, right? So it's not a specific time. It's like, how hard could Kim go before, and then how long does it take Kim to really recover for her to go hard? So she looks at like a sprint interval. And so I remember back in high school when I ran track, we used to do these things called candy canes, right? So she talks about sprint intervals. And so a track is 400 meters around the entire oval. So can you go halfway around? So that's what my old track coach called a candy cane. Can I sprint the candy cane, then start to walk, catch my breath, sprint the candy cane, catch my breath? How many rounds could I go before my body's like, girl, we're good, right? That's what she is truly meaning by HIIT training. The same thing can be done at the gym, I know at CrossFit gyms they have these, but I'm assuming other type gyms might have them. Those assault bikes where there's like a big wheel that looks like a fan in front and the arms move. And so like you would go as hard as you possibly can and then recover, catch your breath until you go as hard as you possibly can. And for most of us, probably after 3 or 4 rounds, you're like, girl, I got nothing left in the tank. But the same thing could be done, I'm not a big fan of sprinting on the treadmill because the treadmill helps you, but maybe you bring up that incline and you go as high as you can, as fast as you can incline, and then you bring it down and catch your breath. Battle ropes, kettlebell swings, like those types of things that really like rev the heart rate and then catch your breath until you can go back again. She also talks about EMOMs, every minute on the minute. And these were really popular, but probably still are popular in the CrossFit world, where say I give you 4 exercises. So let's say I'm literally making this up. We're going to do squats, kettlebell swings, overhead presses, and jump squats, right? Those are the 4 exercises. So say we're doing every exercise for 10 reps. So I set a timer for a minute. I do my 10 reps of the exercise. However long it takes me to do those 10 reps, whatever time is remaining in that minute, I recover until the next minute is ready. So if I'm starting at 0 and I do 10 reps and it takes me 30 seconds to do those 10 reps, I recover for those 30 seconds. Once it hits 1 minute, I now move on to the next exercise. However long it takes me to do those exercises for 10 reps, I recover for however much time is left, and then I go on to minute 2 and so forth and so forth. That's every minute on minute. So those are the types of like true HIIT workouts that she's talking about. And it's going to look different than what you're used to. Many of us, we go to a spin class and we're like, yeah, that was HIIT. That was hard for 45 minutes, right? So where can we go? Can we start to shift that? And can we think about doing that a couple of days a week? And really seeing how hard we could actually go, and how quickly can we recover our heart rate. And it's just going to be really interesting to see what that looks like. And so she talks about strength training, and strength training is more, and at this age, this 40+ age, sure, I know for me, my whole world was about aesthetics, right? I chased aesthetics. I was a fitness competitor. That's what we were judged on. But as we move into this 40-year age, we're talking about how do we get metabolic adaptation, right? How do we start to find a way to use our muscle to kick in that anti-inflammatory response that we basically get from estrogen, but estrogen is starting to get a little wonky at this time of age. But also, how do we get our nervous system firing so that our nervous system is really starting to understand what it's like to have load? Because the things that used to help us with load, the things that used to help us with inflammation, they're not going to be there in the quantities that we are used to. So as we start to strength train this time, we're starting to teach our body that it's okay to use the fatty acids that are floating around in our bloodstream, use them for fuel versus storing them as a visceral fat. And so as we lift, we talk about, like I gave an example of, you're lifting 3 to 4 days a week, right? And for a lot of people, like that's a mind shift. A lot of my clients, when they come to me, they're used to 6 to 7 days working out, and now it's shifting. And can you work out 3 to 4 days, like pure lifting, and then you give yourself 1 to 2 days of that HIIT training, and you're good, right? So you're max training 5 days a week, and if your time if you have the time, maybe you can add in that HIIT to that strength training. And this right here was the biggest pill for me to swallow, right? I was used to, if a workout wasn't 2 hours, why work out? I was, my workouts had to be body part splits. And when I first started, my shift into my thought process around workouts and my clientele, I basically said, what keeps you from working out? And the number one thing that kept people from working out was time, right? In our 20s and 30s, we had all the time in the world. But now, 40 something, we got kids, we have jobs that might be a bit more demanding. Aging parents just don't want to. Sometimes mustering up the motivation to go to the gym for 2 hours just isn't there. And so the shift that I started to make with my personal workouts, but also the workouts I provide with my clients, is that I want them to be able to get in and out of the gym 30, 45 minutes max, right? So that they only had 30 minutes. They could get in and out of the gym and just feel like they got a good workout, right? This is no longer about feeling like you can't wash your hair the next day or get off the toilet the next day. This is, how do we really start to build strength, right? So that we can lift the kitty litter. We can lift, the gallon of water out of the refrigerator. We can get up and out of a chair without needing to push down on the sides. And so what a week of workouts would look like. It's like you'll be doing 3 to 4 days of strength training. And this is like full body workout, or you can do upper and lower body splits. And you're doing 2 to 4 work sets, 6 to 12 reps here. And you're lifting, but you're also leaving some reps in reserve. You're like leaving 1 to 2 reps in reserve, so that, you still could lift a little bit heavier, but you're not like crushing yourself, but you are feeling the strength. And then you're putting in, 1 to 2 days of these HIIT exercises, that those every minute on the minutes that we talked about, or you're doing those sprint slash HIIT intervals that we talked about. And like I mentioned before, it's about recovery and adaptation. Like, how do we give our bodies the chance to like set? If you are someone who cooks and you cook a turkey, right? Do you like pull the turkey out of the oven on Thanksgiving and you immediately start slicing it? No, I don't even know how long it takes to rest. But you take the turkey out and you let it rest and let the juices start to percolate in there before you cut the turkey and serve it. That's the same thing that happens with your body. She touched on 2 more things before I wrap this podcast. She talked about heat and cold exposure. Now, many of you have probably heard of the Wim Hof method, where you sit in a cold ice bath, or you do breath work. I'm a big fan of breath work. But she believes in cold exposure, but no lower than 50 degrees. It's just a little bit too hard for us ladies to kind of come back from that low temperature. But also, she put a little spin on it. She believes in it being more of how you kick off your workout than how you close down your workout. But she's a fan of heat. She'd rather see a woman do heat exposure, because she feels like heat exposure helps like our brains adapt to hot flashes and night sweats a little bit better, which I know sounds counterintuitive, but it's teaching your body to start to regulate your heat. And, that was one of the things when I was having crazy ass hot flashes, my doctor highly recommended I start doing infrared saunas. And so, I have an infrared sauna blanket that I still use. And it also is great for me. It's great for relaxation. And it's literally the heat just like calms me right down, and like nobody's business. I just feel I feel like I finally have taken a deep breath when I have that infrared sauna. I come out of the infrared sauna blanket. She does talk about supplements, and I feel like that many of us ladies over 40, we're just, inundated with this supplement and that supplement, blah, 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 blah. She talks about 3 things. She talks primarily about creatine, and many of us ladies, we need the creatine to help us with our strength, anywhere from 3 to 5 grams of creatine daily. She talks about vitamin D3. I did a whole podcast on vitamin D and just all the myriad of systems that vitamin D takes part in. It was just, I was mind blowing what it took part in. She also encourages protein powder, not to rely solely on it. I'm a big believer in protein powder too. I'm not that person who's going to be like, most of your meals should come in a powdered form. I'm a knife and fork girl, true and true, but I also know that if I'm going to try to get 30 to 50 grams of protein, I'm going to need a little support. And protein powder, is a huge help to that. And then she talks about adaptogens. I'm a big believer in adaptogens. I've been using a product that has several adaptogens, and it's really helpful in times of stress to help us kind of chill ourselves out. But also, the thing about adaptogens is that it just kind of knows what your body needs. It kind of either gives you the push up the hill that you need, or helps kind of like, this girl needs to chill her ass out. But yeah, I'm a big fan of adaptogens. And so, those are the kind of the 5-ish basic supplements that she talks about needing. And again, supplements are very personal. Like, I know so many of us will read so and so takes blah blah blah, so I should be taking blah blah blah. Before we load up on all the supplements and all of that, really kind of like take a look at what your true nutrition looks like, right? What's missing? What are we doing for protein? What are we doing for vegetables? What are we doing for fiber before we start reaching for the pill bottle? But overall, this is a great podcast. It was about a 2-hour listen. So it's one of those podcasts that I would say, like, you could break it up into like 4 30-minute sessions, or if you have 2 hours, I had a 2-hour car ride. So it was a perfect listen for being in the car. Lots of takeaways. And those are just my top takeaways. But I would love if, you had any questions about this, or you want me to further expand on any of these topics, absolutely reach out for me, But the biggest takeaway is that, and I've been saying this for years, strength is your foundation, right? Strength training is where it's at. Sprinkle in the cardio. Always listen to your body. Your body knows what's going on, because it's all about how do we create sustainable long-term habits so that we not only feel good, that we are like the baddest bitches in the old folks home, right? That we're like the example. And that's what I'm looking for. And, aesthetics will come from it if we get all of these pieces on board. But let's start with like honing our strength training, break free of the, go big or go home mentality, and starting to scale it back and being okay with the rest, being okay that I'm not having to go balls to the wall with every single workout that I do. All right, ladies, I would love to hear your thoughts on this. Any questions, comments? Do me a favor, screenshot this and let me know one big takeaway that you took from this episode. If you have any questions, you know how to reach me. All right, stay fabulous, and I will talk to you next week.